Hi, as you noticed, I have a different background. I am house sitting and dog sitting for a friend of mine, and I am putting together the videos for this, and I discovered I can't find my video recording of chapter 3. And we don't want to skip chapter 3, it's very important. So this will be Graham's story time, chapter 3 of The Diamond in the Window. Okay. And here is the picture that goes with chapter 3. Looks like Aunt Lily and Edward and Eleanor are looking at a photo album. It's called The Lost Children. Downstairs, the distant piano scale stopped suddenly and the front door slammed. Faint and far away, Mary Jane's lesson was over. Edward and Eleanor found themselves scurrying helter-skelter down the ladder-like steps and walking with stiff but hurrying legs down the attic stairs and along the corridor, down the big front stairs, past Percival, and past the darkened star of Mrs. Truth, to brush through the velvet curtains that hung in the parlor arch and confront Aunt Lily. She was arranging her music at the piano. They stood and looked at her with drawn, frightened faces. "When is that child going to pay me?" said Aunt Lily. "So many of them are absent-minded about my 50 cents. Do you suppose they embezzle it?" Aunt Lily saw their faces. "Why, what's the matter with you two?" They told her. Then, in a nervous rush of words about the attic room and the hidden steps and the keyhole window and the beds, Aunt Lily put her hand up to her forehead and sighed. "So, you found it," she said. "I'd hoped I would never have to tell you." "But you do," said Eleanor. Aunt Lily looked at them. She brushed back a straying strand of hair and stuffed it into her bun with a sharp hairpin. "I suppose I do," she said. "Wait here." She got up from the piano stool and went upstairs. Edward and Eleanor sat stiffly on the sofa. Presently she came back with something in her hand. It was a photograph album. Aunt Lily sat between them and turned the pages slowly. It was one of those old-fashioned albums with a tooled leather cover. The pictures were mounted in pretty oval frames, only one to a page. Great aunts and great uncles looked out at them, splendid in bustles and bonnets and top hats and frock coats, leaning on carpet-covered tables or standing against painted backgrounds of the eruption of Vesuvius. "That's father, isn't it?" said Eleanor, stopping the page at one place with her finger. "Yes," said Aunt Lily. "That was Arthur when he was a student at Harvard College. And here's your sainted mother, just before the accident that cost them both their lives." Aunt Lily sighed again and turned the pages. "Here, this is what I was looking for." She smoothed the pages and opened the book out flat. Eleanor and Edward bent over to see. On the left-hand page was a photograph of a good-looking boy about Eleanor's age. On the right hand was a matching photograph of a little girl who looked about as old as Edward. She wore a white frock and black stockings, and with the flood of light hair over her shoulders, she looked very much like a pretty picture of by Reginald Birch in an old St. Nicholas magazine. "Who are they?" said Eleanor. "They're your Aunt Eleanor and your Uncle Edward," said Lily. "But," said Edward. "But we never heard of them," said Eleanor. "There were 5 of us, you see," said Aunt Lily. "Fred was the oldest. Your father Arthur was next. I was next, and Edward and Eleanor were the youngest. We called them Ned and Nora. You children were named for them, of course. I was 17 when our parents died, and after that I had to take care of Ned and Nora and be housekeeper for all of us. But I didn't mind." Aunt Lily smiled sadly. "They were good, happy children." "But what happened to them?" said Eleanor. "They disappeared," said Aunt Lily. "Disappeared?" said Edward and Eleanor together. "Yes, one day they just vanished." "Is that their beds in the tower room?" said Edward. "Yes," said Aunt Lily. "They took a fancy to the room and took all their treasures up there. I never gave up hope that they would come back some day, so I kept it ready for them always." "Do you still?" said Eleanor in awe. "Yes," said Aunt Lily. "But it's been so long," said Edward. "I don't care," said Aunt Lily. Her voice sounded taut. Eleanor didn't know what to say. She looked at the small faces in the album. They were open, friendly faces with a familiar family look. There was something recognizable in the noses and mouths, something Edward-like in the girl's plump legs and freckle face. Edward turned the page over. "Look," he said, "who's that?" Aunt Lily glanced at the picture, then she did something strange. She turned a deep red and shut the book. Then she shook herself a little and looked at Edward. "Well," she said, "it's part of the story, really." She opened the book again and turned the pages in the picture Edward had found. "This is Prince Krishna, son of the Maharaja Amandakor." Okay, I'm going to show you the picture. This is the middle of the chapter, very rare. So we have Edward and Eleanor on the outsides, and in the middle is Prince Krishna. Edward and Eleanor stared. The photograph was a tall, slender figure in a plain black suit. He wore a turban on his head. His face was the handsomest Eleanor had ever seen, but it looked at the same time modest and thoughtful. He looked every inch a prince or a maharaja or a king or anything very great or very noble. His hand was resting on a table, on the open pages of a book. "That's Emerson's essay," said Aunt Lily. She looked steadily at the picture and began quietly to tell them about Prince Krishna. "He was here, you see, in our house to study about the Transcendentalists with Fred. Perhaps you children don't know it, but in those days your Uncle Fred was famous all over the world for his books about Emerson and Thoreau. Even Prince Krishna in India had heard about him, and he came all the way across the world to stay with us here in Concord to study with Fred. He lived with us right here in this very house." And Aunt Lily's voice trailed off. "What does that word mean, Aunt Lily?" said Edward. "What word?" said Aunt Lily. "Oh, you mean transcendentalist. Well, it just means people like Emerson and Thoreau here in New England 100 years ago. Krishna explained it to me once. I'm not sure I got it straight. I think he said the transcendentalists believed that men's minds were very wonderful and that they could know all kinds of important things without being taught about them through their own eyes and ears because there was part of something called an oversoul. I think that's what he said." "Without being taught," said Eddie. "You mean no school?" "Well, I don't remember anything like that," said Aunt Lily. "I remember he said there was a real meaning in nature, and that things like clouds and trees could remind us of these wonderful things that we know already. And the transcendentalists don't think it was important to get rich. They lived very simply. It was something like that. I may have it all wrong." Eleanor didn't understand. Eddie did. He decided the transcendentalists didn't believe in school, and he looked at the bust of Henry and Waldo with new respect. Aunt Lily was looking again at the picture of Prince Krishna. "I used to cook his meals and dust his room and make his bed," she said. "He was so good. Ned and Nora loved him, and he made up wonderful games for them. Treasure hunts with lovely prizes. He was fabulously rich, and the children could find jewels, real rubies and diamonds tucked in their pockets. But he was like the transcendentalist. He didn't care about money. He lived in a bare room and wouldn't even let me hang curtains in it. He wore threadbare clothes and sewed on his own buttons." Aunt Lily broke down suddenly and wept. Eleanor stared. Aunt Lily must have been in love with Prince Krishna. Eleanor couldn't blame her. He was much better looking than Benjamin Parks. "But what happened to him?" she said. Aunt Lily recovered herself, straightening up. "He disappeared too," she said, and her voice sounded flat. Edward had a brilliant idea. "He kidnapped them. He kidnapped Ned and Nora and took them back to India." "No, no," said Aunt Lily. "He didn't disappear until afterwards. They vanished first, and he was just as heartbroken as the rest of us. The police made a tremendous effort to find them. They searched the town. They sent detectives all over the country, even all the way to India. But Prince Krishna kept insisting they were here, right in this house. He nearly went out of his mind. He ransacked the house from top to bottom, looking in the most absurd places. He kept saying, 'They must be here, they must be here.' And then suddenly he was gone too. He never even wrote a letter, not a single line." A tear fell on the page. Aunt Lily hastily wiped it away. with a fold of her skirt, and after that your poor Uncle Freddie was never quite the same. There was a dried rose pressed between the pages of the album. Aunt Lily picked it up to catch the scent of an ancient time. "Look, Aunt Lily, who's that?" said Eleanor. On the opposite page, it had been hidden under the flower, there was a photograph of a young girl, charming and fresh faced, with a big bow on her long hair and a shirt waist and long skirt. I have to pause. Hold on. Sorry, the dog was barking. I'm house sitting and dog sitting. I'll move back here. Okay. So let's go back and say there was a dried road. There was a dried rose pressed between the pages of the album. Aunt Lily picked it up to catch the scent of an ancient time. "Look, Aunt Lily, who's that?" said Eleanor. On the opposite page, where it had been hidden under the flower, there was a photograph of a young girl, charming and fresh-faced, with a big bow in her long hair and a shirt waist and long skirt. Aunt Lily blew her nose. "Believe it or not," she said that a little grimly, "that was me." "Oh, but she's so pretty," said Eleanor, gushing over the picture. Then she could have bitten off her tongue. She looked up aghast at Aunt Lily. Aunt Lily said nothing. "Oh, Aunt Lily, not that you're not pretty, too. You're just old," suggested Aunt Lily. "No, of course not," said Eleanor loyally. "Well," said Aunt Lily, laughing suddenly and getting up, "I am old enough to hold the whip hand around here. You two get busy and do your chores." Edward stood up slowly. "Where were they when you last saw them?" "Ned and Nora, I mean," he said. "They were in those beds upstairs," said Aunt Lily. "I tucked them in myself the night before. In the morning, they were gone." Now you know the mystery. A story has to have a goal. So Ned and Nora disappeared. Do you think Eleanor and Edward are going to try to find them? That is what the story's about.